ahead and get started with the first story here. That didn't count. That was just kind of a throwaway story. Not a throwaway story, but that was just kind of a starter story. Now we're going to move on to another starter story. So this one is the story of Crush, Texas. Now, Crush, Texas is a city in Texas called Crush, or it was a city in Texas called Crush. It was a city that only existed for one day. So in 1896, there was a guy named William George Crush, and he worked for the Missouri, Kansas, Texas Railroad, and they called it the Katy for short. So the Katy Railroad, and he said, you know what, there's a couple other companies that have done this. Let's do this promotional thing. We're going to take two trains they're not in service anymore. We're going to take two locomotives, and we're going to crash them into each other. They didn't have television back then. So this was a good idea. They're going to crash them into each other, and we'll use it as promotion for our railroad. So what it was they said for anywhere in Texas, it only cost you $2 to take the train to Crush. Again, $2 back then was the equivalent to like $20 now, but it was still a good deal. So they were able to show off their railway. It was going to be this big promotional thing. And the Katy Railroad said, that's a great idea. Other people have done it. It's been totally fine. They got the engines, they took 6 boxcars and put it on each locomotive. They chained them together so the cars wouldn't buckle off, go flying off. And they said, okay, well, we're not using these locomotives anymore. We have these big boilers in them that power the locomotives. Is there any chance these are going to rupture? And they're like, no. These are designed to be rupture-proof. So I think you know where this story's going. Because William Crush came up with the name, that's why they decided to call the town Crush. The town was basically set up where the two trains would collide. And they didn't build buildings, they didn't build like a whorehouse and a saloon and stuff like that. It was just people came out in big tents, and it turned into a huge event. Like you had carnival rides, you had events, which is what I have written down in my notes, so just fill in the blank what events are going on. There's events, and a bunch of people showed up. And when I say a bunch of people, 40,000 people showed up. For this one day, Crush, Texas became the second biggest city in Texas. Now, the trains are only going 45 miles an hour. So 40,000 people are there. Of course, there's going to be a journalist there. And they took some notes of what was going on. 2 trains. I guess no one was blowing the whistle because no one was on the train. But anyways, the 2 trains are coming at each other. The 40,000 people are standing around. Little kids holding balloons. People playing events. The 2 trains collide. And then here we go this is a quote from one of the eyewitness accounts, the journalist. A crash, a sound of timbers rent and torn, and then a shower of splinters. So the wood on the train just... But that wasn't all. There was just this back to the quote here. There was just a swift instance of silence. And then, if controlled by a single impulse, both boilers exploded simultaneously, and the air was filled with flying missiles of iron and steel, varying in size from a postage stamp to half of a driving wheel. So yeah, the boilers that were built to withstand rupture, both ruptured at the same time. So the 2 trains, and they expected there to be splinters and stuff coming off. They expected there to be some debris. And that was one of the things. The people kept wanting to get closer and closer to the tracks, and they had to have guards there to kind of push them away. But they didn't factor in. They basically built 2 giant IEDs, and they just, when the boilers exploded at the same time in the 2 different trains, it basically vaporized the trains. Huge chunks of metal, huge chunks of iron shot up into the sky, hundreds of feet into the sky. And then begin to land. And the crowd panics. Everyone's running. 40,000 people all trying to get as far away from this shower as possible. This is where it gets weird. So all of that stuff you kind of expected to happen. Now we're going into topsy-turvy land because this really beat the odds. This is a really bizarre story. So after all of the shrapnel came down, 40,000 people, 3 people killed, 6 people injured, which is amazing, which is an amazing act. That's a miracle that people weren't just impaled. As people are laying there, some are dead, 6 are wounded. The remaining people there, the remaining 39,993 people, roughly, some go to assist the wounded. Others start picking up pieces of metal and wood as souvenirs. So they just survived this horrible event, and now they're just like, oh, look at half a driving wheel worth of steel. I'm going to take this home. So you had people bleeding out and other people picking up souvenirs. The railway company was like, okay, that was report. It was big news. It's supposed to be this big promotional event. You know, back then, 9 people dying was like 10% of the U.S. population. Like, there weren't a lot of people back then, so 9 people died. They're like, oh my God, flags at half-mast. This is terrible. The railroad company, the Katy Railroad Company, fired William Crush. They fired him. They said that was a terrible idea. You got these people killed. We're going to get sued. We're going to lose so much money over this. You're fired. And then when the newspaper started talking about it the next day, they're like, what a horrible accident. Who could have predicted this? And there was no blowback on the Katy Railroad. So they hired William Crush back, and he worked there for another 60 years. It's funny, nowadays people get like fired from Chipotle for getting caught on video saying, we're not going to serve you guys. And this dude killed 3 people, wounded 6 more, destroyed 2 trains, and then got hired back the next day. And they're like, don't worry about it. We'll pay those people out. Don't worry about it. Katy actually benefited from the publicity. More people knew of that rail line afterwards. So it actually worked out for them. And the weirdest part of this whole story is trains kept doing crashes after this. They're like, I guess people go to NASCAR races and airplane shows and stuff like that, and people blow up. But it's just weird that it was just the world reacted to it as it was like a tragedy. There was a lot of news articles on it, but then they're just like, let's just keep doing it. Super bizarre. That obviously, first off, nowadays, they would never do the train crash without like 100 safety protocols in place. An environmental protection agency coming out and being like, well, you know, if this train wheel goes off this way, it's going to roll over a frog. You can't do that. And if it had these results, then everyone would get sued and everyone would disappear. It's just crazy. But anyway, yeah, I thought it was a weird story. That was a clip from our daily podcast, Dead Rabbit Radio. Dead Rabbit Radio is available anywhere that you listen to podcasts. It's daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime news. If you want to hear the full episode that this clip came from, check the link below. Please like and subscribe. And hit that little bell, too. That does some magical stuff. Thanks, guys.